The crisp, clean sound of my sister's hand striking my face echoed louder than the wedding bells, and in that agonizing silence, I saw Judge Eleanor Thompson watching. I can still feel the sting of it, the shock, as if it happened moments ago. Just hours before, I was soaring, celebrating the biggest architectural triumph of my career, sealing the deal on my dream penthouse, a tangible symbol of years of relentless dedication. I had no idea it would become the very battleground in a bitter public war between sisters. This wasn't some petty squabble, not like the small squabbles my beloved grandmother would mediate during Sunday dinners. This was about inheritance, about betrayal, about secrets buried so deep they threatened to unravel every thread of our family's carefully constructed facade. For years, my younger sister Michelle had been a financial mystery, a beautiful, swirling chaos that constantly worried my dear parents and me. Every phone call seemed to bring a new, inexplicable crisis, a desperate plea for help that was always vague, always urgent. But even with all her past struggles, I never in my wildest dreams imagined her desperation would lead to a public assault at her own wedding reception. With 300 stunned guests as witnesses, and Judge Thompson, a formidable family court judge, and a respected, though distant figure in our family, observing every shattering moment, the real countdown to our family's public implosion had just begun. Because you see, my grandmother, bless her heart, a woman whose love I truly believed was unconditional, had left behind a legacy far more complicated than any of us could have imagined. A legacy that hinged entirely on my penthouse. In that agonizing moment, watching Michelle's eyes filled with a strange, terrifying mix of fury and pure desperation, I realized everything I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, about love, was a carefully constructed lie. Why was my sister willing to destroy everything, even her own wedding day, for a penthouse that was legally and unequivocally mine? The answer, I would soon discover, was buried deep, entwined with a secret illness and a desperate, flawed plan hatched by the very person who claimed to love us most. Michelle's financial troubles were never truly explained, always glossed over by Mom and Dad with a dismissive wave and a whispered assurance that she'll figure it out. But the crises kept coming. It started small, a desperate call about rent, then a car repair, then the electricity bill. Each time, I'd step in, wiring money from my hard-earned savings, a tight knot forming in my stomach. I'd try to offer advice, suggesting budgeting apps or even a second job, but my words were met with a blank stare, or worse, a flash of irritation. "You just don't understand, Sarah," she'd sigh, as if my practical solutions were somehow offensive to her delicate situation. The resentment simmered, a slow burn beneath the surface of our sisterly bond. While I was pulling all-nighters designing blueprints, meticulously saving every penny, Michelle seemed to flit from one vague endeavor to the next, leaving a trail of unpaid debts and broken promises. I remembered the disappointment etched on Dad's face when Michelle dropped out of community college for the third time, claiming it wasn't her path. Yet, whenever Michelle needed a lifeline, our parents, bless their hearts, always found a way, often pulling from their own retirement savings. There was an unspoken rule. Michelle was fragile, Michelle needed protection, and her problems were somehow too complex for ordinary solutions. This pattern chipped away at our relationship, leaving a chasm of unspoken grievances. It wasn't just the money, it was the emotional toll of always being the reliable one, the one who saw through the excuses. There was this lingering sense that our dear grandmother, too, had favored Michelle in a way, often slipping her extra cash, always with a knowing look I couldn't quite decipher. I'd seen the subtle signs of Michelle's struggles, the dark circles under her eyes, her occasional withdrawal. But whenever I pressed, she'd recoil, throwing up walls. Now, looking back, the clues were all there, tiny breadcrumbs I'd dismissed as typical Michelle drama. They led directly to that wedding, to that slap, to the shattering revelation that awaited us all. Our grandmother, bless her kind heart, was a woman of quiet strength, but also of deep, unyielding convictions, especially when it came to health. A hushed tragedy from her past, a distant cousin's misdiagnosis, a life cut tragically short, had instilled in her a profound distrust of conventional medicine. She rarely spoke of it, but the shadow of that loss lingered, particularly where Michelle was concerned. From the earliest age, Michelle seemed to be plagued by vague ailments, frequent bouts of fatigue, unexplained stomach aches, a persistent pallor. My parents, practical people, suggested doctors, but my grandmother would gently yet firmly redirect them. "Nature knows best," she'd murmur, offering Michelle special herbal teas or recommending unconventional energy healers that always came with an exorbitant price tag. Looking back, these subtle signs were everywhere. While I played outside, Michelle often rested indoors, her energy mysteriously depleted. Grandmother would hover, her brow furrowed with concern, always armed with a new tonic or a special diet plan. There was a unique intensity in her gaze when she looked at Michelle, a blend of fierce protection and quiet fear I couldn't comprehend then. It seemed Michelle was her special project, a delicate bloom to be protected from the harsh realities of the world and, more specifically, from modern doctors. A few years before she passed, grandmother started hinting about a special fund she'd set aside specifically for Michelle. She'd pull me aside during family gatherings, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "You're so strong, Sarah, so capable," she'd say, squeezing my hand. "But Michelle needs extra care, extra security." I'd nod, confused by the distinction, by this hidden disparity in her affection, but never truly questioned her intentions. I simply assumed it was a general nest egg, a safety net for Michelle's perceived fragility. What I didn't know was the chilling truth behind that fund and the almost obsessive lengths my grandmother had gone to, convinced she alone held the key to Michelle's elusive well-being. That understanding, the true extent of her mysterious influence, would only come much later, shattering my perception of our family's past. After the slap, the wedding reception dissolved into a blurred tableau of hushed whispers and averted gazes. I stumbled away from the main floor, the humiliation a hot flush across my cheeks, trying to process the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Amidst the chaos, a strange clarity cut through my shock. I saw Judge Thompson standing near the ornate ballroom entrance, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp and unusually focused on me. She wasn't just a distant relative attending a family wedding. Her gaze held a professional intensity, a dissecting quality that unsettled me. Then, almost imperceptibly, I saw her exchange a quick, knowing nod with Mr. Henderson, the wedding officiant, who also happened to be the executor of my grandmother's sprawling estate. A cold prickle ran down my spine. A memory resurfaced, fleeting but potent. Months ago, at a formal family gathering, I'd briefly spoken with Judge Thompson. She'd mentioned, almost casually, that she was handling a particularly complex estate matter with some unusual clauses, a case she found intellectually stimulating. At the time, I'd assumed she was referring to one of her high-profile court cases, perhaps some convoluted business dispute. Now, the pieces began to click into place with an alarming precision. My grandmother's will, while seemingly straightforward on the surface, had always been overseen by Mr. Henderson, a man known for his meticulous, almost obsessive attention to legal detail. Why would he be signaling a family court judge at a wedding? As an architect, I've learned that a building's integrity often lies in its unseen foundations, in the complex legal documents that underpin its ownership. A seemingly minor clause, a hidden easement, can completely unravel years of work. Could my grandmother's will, so seemingly clear about the penthouse being mine, contain some hidden, insidious detail that Mr. Henderson had flagged to Judge Thompson? The judge's presence, her focused gaze, her subtle exchange with the executor, it wasn't coincidence. It was a calculated observation. She wasn't just a guest. She was an investigator, subtly tracing the outlines of a family dispute that had just exploded into public view, a dispute she was clearly already familiar with. The air in the ballroom, thick with the scent of lilies and stunned silence, suddenly felt charged with an unspoken legal tension. The phone call came just hours after the wedding guests had finally dispersed, leaving behind only the ghosts of shattered dreams and spilled champagne. It was Judge Thompson, her voice calm yet insistent, requesting an urgent private meeting. She spoke of a highly unusual and ethically challenging codicil found by the estate's executor, Mr. Henderson, within my grandmother's intricate will. My pulse quickened. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about something far deeper, something that felt like a lifetime of questions finally demanding answers. Sitting across from Judge Thompson in her quiet office, the truth began to unfold, slowly at first, then with a devastating rush. The secret, long-standing medical debt I'd vaguely imagined was, in reality, a far more insidious and heartbreaking burden. Michelle, my beautiful, chaotic sister, had been silently battling a series of undiagnosed, debilitating autoimmune disorders since childhood. Her frequent bouts of fatigue, the stomach problems, the withdrawals, they weren't fleeting complaints or excuses. They were symptoms of a body turning against itself, constantly misdiagnosed or, more cruelly, dismissed as mere anxiety. My grandmother, in her desperate, misguided love, had become obsessed with finding alternative, experimental treatments for Michelle. Remembering her deep-seated distrust of conventional medicine, born from that old family tragedy, a tragic misdiagnosis that had haunted her for decades, it suddenly made chilling sense. These were not minor remedies. They were astronomically expensive, unproven therapies administered by a rotating cast of specialists who promised miracles but delivered only escalating bills. The special fund grandmother had created for Michelle wasn't for general support. It was a rapidly dwindling war chest against an enemy no one truly understood. Michelle, burdened by the shame of her chronic illness, by the perceived failure of these treatments, and by the crushing, accumulating debt, had kept it all a profound secret. She'd protected our parents, who'd never understood the true depth of her suffering, and she'd protected herself from the judgment she feared, especially from me, the pragmatic, strong sister. The judge explained how difficult these cases were, not just medically, but legally, highlighting how well-intentioned family actions, without transparency or proper legal oversight, could spiral into unforeseen disasters. It made me wonder how many families silently carried such immense burdens. Could this be why so many people struggle in the shadows? The penthouse, my symbol of independence, wasn't just a prized possession. It was the last, most liquid asset left in my grandmother's desperate, flawed scheme to save Michelle. Michelle, convinced it was her only hope for survival, believed it was truly hers, not out of greed, but out of a terror I could now begin to fathom. Judge Thompson's words hung heavy in the air, each one a hammer blow to my understanding of my own family. My grandmother, in her declining health and spiraling desperation, hadn't just amended her will with a minor tweak. She had added a secret codicil, a complex legal clause hidden within a separate, sealed document, one that only became active under very specific, dire circumstances. It was a testament to her unyielding belief in those experimental treatments and her profound fear for Michelle's future. The judge explained that it was precisely these kinds of opaque, conditionally triggered clauses that often led to the most painful family disputes. This codicil stipulated that if Michelle's condition reached a critical point and the original, hidden trust fund for her treatments ran out, as it clearly had, then my penthouse, the very home I'd worked so hard to build, was to be sold. The proceeds were to be exclusively used to fund Michelle's life-saving, but tragically unproven and obscenely expensive, alternative medical treatments. My grandmother, a woman who truly valued life above all else, genuinely believed I, the pragmatic and successful sister, would understand this ultimate sacrifice for Michelle's survival. She must have thought my love for my sister and my financial stability would make me readily comply, no questions asked. The revelation was a gut punch. It wasn't just Michelle's desperation, it was my grandmother's desperate, misguided love that had engineered this impossible situation. Michelle, burdened by the immense secret of her illness, the futility of her grandmother's efforts, and the crushing weight of astronomical ongoing medical debt, had seen that penthouse not as a symbol of my success, but as her last literal hope for survival. She hadn't been demanding my home out of malice or pure greed, but out of a terror-stricken conviction instilled by our grandmother that it was her rightful, final recourse. The legal complexity of the codicil, its conditional activation, was something only an expert like Judge Thompson could untangle. It painted a vivid picture of my grandmother's escalating anxiety, her final, desperate attempt to control a fate she couldn't otherwise conquer. This wasn't just about money. It was about a legacy of fear, love, and a profound, tragic misunderstanding. It highlighted a stark reality. Even the most loving intentions, when shrouded in secrecy and untethered from practical, transparent plans, could become a destructive force, tearing families apart. My world, already shaken by Michelle's slap, now completely fractured under the weight of this hidden, tragic truth. The tension in Judge Thompson's private conference room was thick to cut with a knife. She had convened a formal family meeting, Michelle, our bewildered parents, and me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. Armed with the devastating truth of the codicil, I looked at Michelle, no longer seeing just a reckless sister, but a woman drowning under an unimaginable burden. Judge Thompson began, her voice crisp and clear, laying out the complexities of Grandma's will and the conditional clause, subtly hinting at the desperation that must have driven its creation. Michelle, initially defiant, a familiar mask of defensive anger hardening her features, seemed poised to launch another tirade. But this time, I didn't let her. "Michelle," I interrupted, gently, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's time, please, no more secrets." The raw plea in my voice, devoid of accusation, seemed to disarm her. Her shoulders sagged. She glanced at Judge Thompson, then at our parents, their faces etched with confusion and concern. Then the dam broke. Slowly at first, in a voice barely a whisper, Michelle began to speak. She confessed to the debilitating pain that had plagued her since childhood, the constant fatigue she'd masked as laziness, the crippling stomach issues dismissed as stress. She recounted the endless, expensive alternative treatments our grandmother had insisted upon, each one a fleeting hope, each one leaving her further in debt, further isolated. My parents gasped, their faces paling as the true depth of Michelle's silent suffering became agonizingly clear. They had seen fragments, heard whispers, but never understood the complete, relentless war raging within their own daughter's body. She spoke of the shame, the profound isolation of living with an invisible illness, always feeling misunderstood, always feeling like a burden. She admitted the terror that had consumed her when Grandma's special fund finally dwindled, leaving her no option but to activate the codicil. Her voice cracked as she admitted demanding the penthouse, not out of malice, but out of a primal, desperate fear for her own survival. The slap, she choked out, was born of sheer panic, a last irrational act of a woman pushed to her absolute limit, convinced I was withholding her last chance at life. In that raw, tearful, and agonizing confession, witnessed by Judge Thompson, by our stunned parents, and by me, the sister she had just publicly humiliated, something profound shifted. The narrative of the irresponsible sister, the selfish one, shattered into a million pieces, replaced by the heartbreaking reality of a woman in profound pain. It was the emotional payoff I never knew I was yearning for. Not an apology for the slap, but the truth that explained everything. The initial judgment I'd endured from the wedding guests, from my own family, transformed into overwhelming empathy. Michelle wasn't my enemy. She was a casualty of a well-intentioned, but ultimately flawed, hidden plan. The tears streaming down her face were not just for her pain, but for the years of lost connection, the years of misunderstanding between us. The silence that followed Michelle's confession was profound, broken only by my parents' quiet sobs. Judge Thompson, however, remained composed, her gaze thoughtful. She hadn't forced Michelle to speak, but her presence, her calm authority, had created the safe space for truth to emerge. This was the moment I'd unknowingly been waiting for, the sweet revenge I craved, not in retribution, but in vindication. It wasn't about Michelle's humiliation, it was about the truth setting us all free. The judge then addressed Michelle directly, praising her incredible courage in finally revealing her hidden struggles. It was a public acknowledgement that shifted the entire dynamic, turning Michelle from a villain into a survivor. Judge Thompson then turned her attention to me, acknowledging the injustice I'd endured. But instead of suggesting I sell my penthouse, she leaned forward, her voice becoming purposeful. "While the codicil reflects your grandmother's intentions," she began, "it presents a unique and tragic situation. Fortunately, there are legal and humanitarian avenues we can explore." She outlined a brilliant strategy, leveraging Michelle's now documented medical condition to access specialized charitable healthcare foundations and legal aid programs. This was the plot payoff, a solution that was elegant, intelligent, and fair, allowing Michelle to receive effective, affordable, and legitimate medical treatment without demanding I sacrifice my home. It was a stroke of genius, a testament to her profound legal acumen. The relief that washed over me was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. As an architect, I've always thrived on complex problem solving, on finding innovative ways to build structures that stand strong. Here, in this crisis, I saw a new kind of structure to build. I volunteered immediately. "Judge Thompson," I said, "I want to help. I can use my professional network, my organizational skills, to connect Michelle with reputable specialists to navigate the system. My expertise in resource management, in meticulously planning and executing large-scale projects, could be directly applied to her care." My parents, their faces still tear-streaked but now hopeful, looked at me with a newfound respect. Michelle, frail but with a glimmer of something akin to peace in her eyes, nodded. This wasn't just about avoiding a legal battle. It was about laying a new foundation for our family. The judge's intervention, coupled with Michelle's bravery and my willingness to help, transformed the very nature of our conflict. It wasn't a win for me over Michelle, but a victory for us together against a silent enemy of illness and misunderstanding. It was the beginning of true healing, a powerful character payoff for both of us. The truth, painful as it was, had become our greatest tool for building something stronger than ever before. The weeks following that tumultuous family meeting felt like a slow, tender dawn after a long, dark night. Michelle, supported by my parents and me, began her journey into legitimate medical treatment. It wasn't an overnight fix, but the change was palpable. The chronic pain, which had shadowed her for decades, started to recede under the care of doctors who truly understood autoimmune disorders. The fear in her eyes gradually gave way to a fragile hope and a quiet determination I'd never seen in her before. Our family dynamics, once fractured by unspoken resentments and hidden pain, began to shift dramatically. My parents, bless their hearts, were consumed with regret for not having understood the true depth of Michelle's suffering. They showered her with the open, honest support she'd always craved, attending appointments with her, listening without judgment. It was as if a heavy curtain had been lifted, allowing real communication and empathy to finally flourish. They even started seeing a family therapist, something I never imagined possible, to process the years of misunderstanding and rebuild trust. As for Michelle and me, our sisterhood, once strained to the breaking point, began a slow, deliberate mending. It wasn't immediate forgiveness for the slap, some things take time, but it was a recognition of the profound truth that had fueled it. We started with small steps, weekly calls where we actually talked about real things, not just surface pleasantries. I helped her organize her medical records, leveraging my own project management skills, and connected her with patient advocacy groups. We shared silent meals at my penthouse, the very place that had been the flashpoint of our conflict, now a quiet sanctuary for two sisters finally finding their way back to each other. The initial public humiliation from the wedding, the whispers and judging glances, slowly faded. Those who knew the full story offered quiet respect, a testament to the power of truth. The penthouse remained mine, a hard-won symbol of my independence, but it was no longer a point of contention. Instead, it became a quiet symbol of resilience, of a family choosing understanding over resentment. My grandmother's love, though misguided in its execution, was finally understood for its profound depth. It was a messy, painful journey, but one that led us to a place of unexpected peace. We learned that true family wealth isn't measured in properties or inheritances, but in the strength of bonds forged in honesty and profound, unwavering empathy. Looking back, that slap at the wedding wasn't the end of our family. It was the violent beginning of its true reconstruction. The lessons I learned were etched deeper than any blueprint. Sometimes the most seemingly irrational conflicts are built on foundations of profound, unexpressed pain. We, as women, often carry so much in silence, trying to be strong, trying to protect those we love, sometimes to our own detriment. Michelle's story is a powerful reminder that what appears to be recklessness can often be a desperate cry for help, masked by shame and misunderstanding. As an architect, I've always known that a strong foundation isn't just about steel and concrete. It's about transparency and trust. You can't build something solid on hidden cracks. This experience taught me that the same holds true for family. Trust your instincts when something feels fundamentally wrong, when a story doesn't quite add up. Don't be afraid to dig deeper than the surface, to push past the discomfort, because the truth, no matter how painful, is the only real path to healing. Real strength comes not just from winning, but from understanding, from daring to be vulnerable enough to see the pain in another, even when it's directed at you. My family's journey is far from perfect, but we're building something real now, on a foundation of honesty and empathy. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where the truth was far more complex than it first appeared, where a family secret threatened to tear everything apart, you're not alone. What hidden burdens might those around you be carrying? Consider opening that difficult conversation. Sometimes, simply listening with an open heart is the first step towards bridging those impossible divides. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, but also be open to understanding the unseen burdens others carry.